Time for something new. We're going to look at human learning and development over the course of the next 5 videos. And I've broken it down into 5 separate topics. And as usual, we can't be exhaustive, of course. What we're doing is taking a look at a variety of approaches that tease out different aspects of the manner in which we become humans, the manner in which we transit from infanthood through childhood to adulthood. And we compare humans, as before, to animals. So that's where we're going to start, with a spectrum on which you can place all animals, which is under-discussed. You're all aware that a newborn human infant is particularly helpless. They can squawk, they can poo, they can pee, they can feed, and they can sleep. And that's about it. Now, that's the case for a lot of animals. They are helpless at birth and underdeveloped and in need of parental care and attention. It's not the case for all animals. Those animals who are relatively able to cope for themselves at birth, who come out and arrive in the world in a more or less developed form, we call precocial animals. You know the word precocious, someone who exhibits abilities at an early age. Whereas the altricial animals are those who are in need of parental investment. Compare that with the word altruism. When we survey a lot of animals of all different kinds, and we consider them in this way, humans are exceptional. We have the longest period of parental attachment and dependence of any animal. It's hard to put words on this, to be precise. When are you independent of your parents? There's no answer that applies to human animals particularly, but typically we are in need of parental support for at least sort of 15 years or something like that, which is vastly more than most animals. So what's the difference? Why are some animals able to take care of themselves and others not at birth? The skills we're talking about here are primarily the skills of getting around in the world, finding yourself somewhere to hang out, be it a nest or a cave or whatever, protect yourself, and to feed yourself. So those are the skills involved. We're not talking about piano playing here. We're talking about basic locomotion, feeding, and self-preservation. Now, there are various ways to interpret this observation, and some of them are just plumb wrong. You might think, oh, well, humans, they're the brainy animals, so that's why they have all this time, and other animals that are helpless must be sort of brainier than the ones that are not. That's not the case. So the difference between strongly altricial and strongly precocial animals is not intelligence, nor is it sophistication, and nor is it similarity to humans. We are at one end of the scale, but there are animals not that different from us which are precocial rather than altricial, while there are animals very remote from us which are altricial and not precocial. To understand why this is, we need to look not just at the animal and its body, but at the niche that it occupies, the ecological niche that it occupies. Every organism has a corresponding ecological niche from which it gathers the resources that it needs. Occupying a niche places demands on you, and it's going to depend what your niche is. Some niches just don't offer you the luxury of parental care and parental guidance and being taken care of. Let's put it bluntly, if you're an antelope and you're born on the savannah and you don't get up and walk immediately, you'll be eaten by something. So if you're born very underdeveloped, then outside the egg or the womb, you have a period of biological development in which there are influences which are not just from the mother. There are influences now that constrain and guide biological development that are coming rather from the environment. In this way, then, Animals that have this period of development outside the egg or the womb have a chance to fine-tune their biological capacities in accordance with the niche they find themselves in. And this has consequences. So look at the map there. All those red areas are areas in which the brown rat is found. They're also pretty much the areas in which the human is found. Enormous distribution, almost everywhere, and in environments ranging from tundra to desert to jungle to savanna, urban, rural, and so on. Altricial animals, by virtue of this long period of co-development of the biological organism within a specific niche, can adapt themselves, can find ways of living in a much wider variety of environmental circumstances than precocial animals. The rat is, of course, a very altricial animal, born helpless in need of parental care, and its widespread distribution is due to this fine-tuning that goes on in biological development, but after birth. So the skills that we're talking about, again, refer to fairly fundamental kind of achievements which are relevant to all animals. Locomotion, finding shelter, avoiding prey, catching food, and so on. Even though I said this is not about intelligence or similarity to human, it's sometimes laid out like that. So here are two ways that the observations we've made so far are sometimes discussed. The first one, altricial animals display the hallmarks of flexible, adaptable behavior, which contrasts with inflexible, rigid instinct. I'm going to suggest that's a bad reading of what we just did. The second reading, altricial animals illustrated an intertwining of the animal and its environment. And when we take that perspective and we look at humans, then we have to ask about the environment of humans. The environment of humans is not to be measured in terms of fields and trees and rocks. The most important elements in our environment are, first of all, human-made. They are human constructions, they are human agreements, they are the social environment, and the most important elements in our environment are other humans. So our becoming members of a specific culture or becoming speakers of a specific language are all part of this process. Those are particularly human things, culture and language, of course, and they are made possible in part because of this long period of relative helplessness. I'd like to point out at this stage as well that that first less good reading of these appeals to something called instinct. This was a very popular thing to appeal to in the 19th century. Its popularity has waned in the 20th century, and I don't think any self-respecting biologist would use the term instinct anymore. Instinct was a way of suggesting, of drawing a line in the natural kingdom between the creatures with souls and the creatures which are machines. As an explanatory construct, it doesn't really make much sense anymore, so I'll just put that out there as a caution. So humans are born in this helpless state. What parts of their body are underdeveloped? Well, the liver is. It takes about a month for the liver to develop fully after birth, so the diet has to be adjusted to that. The bones in the skull are underdeveloped. They're very soft because we have such a difficult birth passage, and the head needs to be compressible. Once you're out, that's no longer required, so the bones harden up. But it's the brain, that takes a long period, the longest period in humans. And one part of the brain in particular, that part of the brain that is most peculiarly characteristic of humans, and I'm talking about an area called the prefrontal cortex towards the front. You can see it at the front of this brain on the left-hand side, the prefrontal area. We'll be meeting the prefrontal cortex at several points along our journey in this module, and it is not fully developed until about 21 years of age. Again, it's difficult to draw firm lines here. You could add on or take off a couple of years off that, but that's the kind of length of time that we're talking about. So in that period of about, let's say, 20 years, The human organism is becoming the human person through enculturation, through development of language, and through intertwining with a specific cultural context. So the physiological development of the brain goes hand in hand with the social development of the individual. This is a very important point for understanding us and our brains. I am not going to tell you that any part of the brain does X, Y, or Z with any confidence. The brain is still largely poorly understood. We have many theories that don't add up to a single confident story of what the brain is. And this part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, has been implicated in all kinds of things, attributes that we would recognize as distinctly human. So things like the conscious control of behavior or the ability to fit in society or these kinds of things. One thing we do know is that if you damage this area, then your capacity to get along with other people, the stability of your personality, and your general sociability can all be very strongly compromised. We'll meet this later in the famous case of Mr. Phineas Gage, who did himself a bit of an injury here. So we have this extraordinarily long time, and in that time we are maturing both biologically and we are becoming encultured and linguistic. We are becoming members of a human society. There's a very important point here that I would like to stress, and it's one that is kind of hard to see in the kind of discussion you'll meet in the public press. We often talk about people as if they had a biological core, as if they had a fixed biological form, and culture was then added in on top. We've met this before in the debates between the rationalists and the empiricists, where the empiricists emphasized that the child was born as more or less a blank slate on which culture was then imprinted, whereas the rationalists emphasize the continuity in form going back generations so that the infant is born with specific inbuilt capacities. Both of those extreme views try to separate nature from nurture. We can't do that. It's a mistake to think we can separate nature from nurture, and although it may be pragmatic in some conversations to draw crude distinctions here, we are availing ourselves of a fiction if we do so, and it can be a very damaging fiction as well. It's one that can lead us to downplay the importance of a person's cultural belonging, for example, or take unwarranted stances with respect to the body and the person. So separating the biology from the culture is no more possible than separating the ingredients of a well-baked cake, due to this long period in which we develop and become fully formed humans within a culture.